Hello, cosplay world. My name is Seneca. I am known as this chick25 in most of the forums and communities that I frequent. I am a cosplayer and the girlfriend who is very frequently mentioned of Knives, who does all the Let's Make Cosplay videos. Today we are going to learn to do dark stencils on dark materials. Like this t-shirt. Now, normally you would think, okay, well, why can't I do just a normal stencil on there? Dark materials are different because when you draw or paint on them, it takes either a lot more layers of paint to get the color to show up, or it doesn't show up at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a light base. So it's like having a bright white piece of paper for your color to show up in an entirely different fashion and with a lot fewer layers of paint. So that being said, our supplies we're going to need, of course, the t-shirt, 8.5 by 11 cardstock or poster board. If you're using a printer to print out a simple graphic, 8.5 by 11 cardstock is easier to feed through your printer. If you want to, you can try cutting out poster board or drawing your graphic out. We're going to need an X-Acto knife or the equivalent, whatever you're going to need to create clean lines to cut out your graphic. We're going to need a cutting surface that is okay to damage. I have two things. I have a tabletop that I bought off a thrift store, and I have an actual cutting mat. You can get cutting mats from craft stores. To stick our stencil down before we paint, we're going to need basting spray. Basting spray is a temporary adhesive. I'm going to be using this one. It's Dreet spray adhesive. It's low tack, so it won't stick hardcore to your fabrics, and it's repositionable just in case you screw up a little. This can be found usually near the notions and the ironing things at Joann. This is where I bought that, or whatever crafting fabric store. If you can't find this particular brand, if you go into a quilting store or the quilting section of a lot of stores, there's also quilt basting spray. It pretty much is the same stuff. This is a way bigger can I think I got for the same amount. You're going to need brushes to apply your paint. You can either use regular bristle brushes or you can use sponge brushes. Now both brushes have different techniques that you would use. I'm going to show you both. You're going to need, to create your light base, you're going to need matte fabric paint. Matte is better than a gloss fabric paint or a slick fabric paint, and especially a puff one, because it has more of a tooth. It doesn't cure smooth, so it actually grips the next layer of paint. And then of course you're going to want your showy color. I'm using this fabric paint. Whichever fabric paints you use, by the way, make sure that you follow the directions. So if you have to pre-wash your t-shirt, you want to do that, and follow the directions for after painting. And you're also going to need a piece of cardboard to put inside your t-shirt. At fabric stores there are, you may have seen, t-shirt shaped pieces of cardboard for about $5. Unless you're a stickler about having your t-shirt like perfectly laid out with all the sleeves all perfect and everything, you really don't need that. You can just hack an 18-inch square piece of cardboard out of a big cardboard box, because pretty much all you need is for the t-shirt to lay flat, along its widest dimension. So if your t-shirt's bigger, you might need wider. If your t-shirt's smaller, you may need smaller. So that's all laid out. Now we're going to cut out the stencil. I'm going to try not to get in your way, but this thing's kind of I work with at a weird angle because I'm right-handed. So I might have to start cutting this out upside down. So we're going to fast forward this. You basically use your X-Acto knife in the safest way possible, so don't cut yourself. No blood drawing. Alright. See you in a little bit. Okay, we're all done cutting out our graphic. Now, one thing I want you to notice about this graphic is that it's all pretty much one continuous line. Not all graphics are going to be like that. If you happen to have a graphic that's going to have a hole in it, kind of like this one, where you have a line that loops around itself, you still want it to connect. Or you still want this little bit right here to be in place. So there's two ways you can go about handling this. You can either cut this out and then place it very carefully when you're getting ready to paint your stencil, or you can draw some do not cut spaces so that this little middle piece will have something to hang on to. Now, if you have these, after you glue your stencil down, you can go in with little scissors and cut these little things off right before you paint, because it'll already be glued down. Then you won't have to worry about it. So that's just a little suggestion, you know, if you have a different kind of graphic that doesn't have a complete continuous line. So now we're going to glue this down. And I'm going to use the junky side of my tabletop. And probably another piece of paper. So make sure to always follow the directions on your spray adhesive. This one says hold the can 12 inches from the surface. So that's probably right about here. I have really long arms. Make sure to do a good coat, because this has to stick down the entire time you're painting. Okay, that should do it. Just a little for good measure. Okay. In there. Okay. Sound like my sister now. Yeah. I'm going to let this dry. I like to give it probably about 20 seconds. Flip my tabletop back over. And then get our t-shirt. T-shirt. Now, considering you're very likely going to be wearing this or giving it to somebody to wear, if you're one of those crafty types to make sure t-shirts for your friends. You want this to be in a nice place when you wear it. So, if you have a measuring tape or a ruler or something, I want this graphic to be about 4 inches from the collar. Using the wrong end of the tape measure. Okay, so that means I gotta move it way down. So let me do that. It's gonna be right up there. And you want to center it. You can use the collar as a... Hey, can I get this thing straight? Can I do that? Can it work that way? Alright. So that's about right. But yeah, just do your best to center the piece of paper to the collar and square it to the sides of the t-shirt, which is really why you want your t-shirt to be laying really flat. Okay. I'm being really, really picky about this, but I don't want to move it around too much. Oh, I know. Okay, there we go. Nice and smooth, no bulges. Okay, so all around the edges of where you are going to paint, you make sure that there is as tight a seal as you can possibly manage. Because you do not want paint getting under your lovely stencil. So now we're going to take my amazing messy palette of all kinds of painting. I've been using this thing all week. And we're going to squidge some of our matte white fabric paint on there. Squidge, 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 squidge. That's probably too much, but hey, whatever. And now, if you don't have any sponge brushes on hand, I'm going to show you how to brush, because when you how to use a bristle brush when you're painting, because using a bristle brush you have to paint in a different way than the sponge brush. So what you're going to do, as you can see, you're going to paint from the paper onto the t-shirt. And what this does is it makes sure that you are pushing the paint away from, in the opposite direction of going under the stencil. That way you don't make a mistake and lift your stencil up. And apparently I can't talk and paint at the same time, but that's okay, because you can see what I'm doing, right? Okay, so we have to work fairly quickly, or at least blend your paint out. Don't grab a whole lot of paint, because you don't want to have to push your paint to the other side of the stencil. Maybe I should be working from both sides. And do as even a coat as possible, because your first coat kind of sets the precedent for the other coats. And I kind of got a little bulge going on here, but it's alright. Alright. So we're going to do 2 coats of this. You're going to have probably about 15 or 20 minutes in between coats, because you don't want the paint to be really dry. And this first coat is really probably the thickest. It actually goes through the t-shirt onto the cardboard. But you want the first coat to be slightly tacky, so the first coat sticks to it, but you don't want it so wet that you're messing up the first coat putting on the second one, because it's almost pointless doing that. It really is not as effective. Alright, so I'm going to finish this. Let this dry. It's going to take about 20 minutes, like I said, so, go read a web comic or some manga or something. Work on another one of your cosplays if you're a cosplayer. We always have lots of irons in the fire. Alright, see you in a bit. Okay, my white base is dried to the touch. Now from this point, depending on how you want your stencil to look, your graphic, you can either add more white paint and make a more solid base. But if you want it to look worn, like vintage graphics where the graphic is kind of faded a little bit or worn off, like it's a well-worn t-shirt, then you can leave it like this. But you can make it a solid white block by adding like 1 or 2 more coats of paint. I'm cool with this. So now we're going to add our showy color. And I guess I'll use the spot right here. You don't really need that much. I just squirted too much doggone paint on here. But now I'm going to show you how to use a sponge brush. Sponge brush is a lot easier. Ooh, cat hair. No. Oh my goodness. Do not want cat hair in the paint job. Okay. Sponge brush is a lot easier to use in terms of painting than the bristle brush, because you just basically dip it and then you hold the brush straight up and down and just pat across the pattern. And you're going to do this for 1 or 2 coats. And this is going to show up very nicely against this white. And it's going to be very bold against the black paint. Now, depending on which brand you use, a lot of people say the brand I'm using right now, which is Tulip, doesn't have, it doesn't show up really good and they don't like to use it. But you just have to know how to use it. There are other brands. There's Lumiere. Lumiere is really expensive paint in comparison to Tulip. But it has really good pigmentation where you don't have to use as many coats. But it also has a lot of extra care that you have to deal with. Like, you have to iron it. You have to wait for it to dry and then you have to iron it. So this, it turns out, is really thin. I've actually never used this color before. I usually blend my teals. But I'm going to use probably an extra coat of this. But I won't have to use nearly as many as if I had to use this directly onto the fabric instead of making a base of a light color. Incidentally, if you want to blend colors or have like an underlying color, you don't have to use white. You can use yellow base or you can use a green base. You can get all kinds of different effects. And you don't only have to do one color at a time. Like if I wanted to rainbow fade this, which I just gave myself an idea, you can do a graphic and like start on one side with red and then work yellow and green, blue and purple. Do a nice rainbow fade graphic. So this is pretty versatile and it makes it really easy to get a lot of color to show up. So I'm going to finish this. Okay, so I literally just put the brush down from putting on my second coat of teal, and now I'm going to pull the stencil off. I'm going to be very careful doing this for the sake of like ripping the stencil. If you want to use it again, darn it, I just ripped it. I'm not going to be able to use that again. But you also, especially if you're pulling it off from wet paint, you don't want to get that paint onto the rest of your t-shirt. Okay, I'm just going to say screw it because stencil is ruined now. Okay, so the stencil's off. As you can see, I used a little too much spray glue. Next time I won't do so much extra spritzing. But like I said before, it's not a permanent glue, so you just pick those little extra bits off. You can see that our teal graphic is a lovely vintage look. It looks nice and well worn, even though the camera probably doesn't do it justice because the lighting in here is kind of off. But it looks very nice, as I said before. If you want deeper color or a more solid block of color, use more white paint and then use more paint over the base. But you just let this dry. I believe the paint instructions said it takes 4 hours to dry. Follow the instructions on your paint. Some paints require ironing after 24 hours or 72. So we're done with this. I'm going to hang it up and it'll be ready to wear because this doesn't require ironing. In the meantime, if you have any textile or makeup art related questions, I'm not pro at anything, but people tell me, you know, that I'm okay at it, then just drop me a comment and I'll see if I can do a video about it. In the meantime, bye everybody.